We're going to talk about crime and safety, obviously big issue in the race. What is the most important police reform you will pursue as mayor?
For me, it's going to be executing the Civilian Oversight Review Board that's going to be on the ballot this November. I applaud the great work of the Safer Cleveland Coalition working to get that ballot amendment passed. And I believe that effective public safety, lowering crime, and police accountability are two sides of the same coin. We can do both. And the prerequisite to having safe and secure neighborhoods all across our city is reestablishing that trust between residents and the police. And I believe this ballot initiative goes a long way in order to do that.
Okay, so you're hitting on a couple of things that flow nicely to my next question. The consent decree, do you think we've achieved the goals of that?
No, we still got a long way to go. I think we made some good steps in the right direction. But as the ballot initiative calls for, it's going to make the Cleveland Police Commission permanent to ensure that these reforms can be long-lasting and be sustained over time. I've also believed that, as Judge Oliver has cited, there are many parts of the consent decree that where the city of Cleveland has not been as effectively compliant on. And so the next mayor must do everything in their power to hold their police chief, the safety director, and our police department more accountable to ensure we can get these reforms effected and implemented in a more effective way long term.
All right, so a little bit of that other flip side of that coin, of the same coin though, is, that's reforming the police, but what will you do to make residents across the city just feel more safe? Because that's what they want. They don't care how we get there.
Yeah, well, on a short-term basis, Mark, I think there are a couple things we got to do. Number one, Cleveland has more police per resident than Columbus, Indianapolis, Toledo, and a few other cities across this state. And roughly 51% of our cops are walking the beat. The other 49% are in desk jobs. That allocation of our forces doesn't make any sense to me. I want to shift that mix to 70% walking the beat, patrolling our community, and 30% on desk jobs. The second thing I want to do is, I want to do what they're doing in the 4th District, where our vice unit and our detective unit are starting to share intelligence to really tackle the top 1% of violent crime in that district. That's something we should be scaling in all 5 of our police districts. And then thirdly, I would say this, the way that we police our communities is fundamentally broken. We got to get to the root causes of violent crime that plague our city. For me, it starts with adding a 4th option in 911 around mental health, so we have the right response for the right call. And I also want to, have a co-responder model of policing in all 5 of our police districts, where social workers and mental health professionals are joining cops for nonviolent 911 calls.
Okay, along the same lines, neighborhood police mini stations, once very popular. Would you bring them back?
It's something that we certainly should take a look at. I think it goes a long way to ensure that residents feel engaged in what's happening in terms of community policing. When I was growing up, my grandma was actually president of our neighborhood watch club. And she knew what was going down on our block probably better than the commander at the time. And so investing in those types of programs, I believe, could go a long way to rebuild that trust and to make sure we have the right neighborhood-based plans to address public safety issues in the city.
Final question on crime and safety, one that's been getting a lot of attention and is the subject of a piece of literature that Dennis Kucinich is putting out today. Illegal dirt bike riders have not only become sort of a symbol of lawlessness, but there is a legitimate safety issue that comes along with it. How do you plan to address it?
Mark, this is all about making sure we have a heavy hand to ensure that we are tackling those folks that are breaking the laws that are on the books right now. I believe we need a special unit inside of our police department to track down and crack down on these ATVs that have been really creating havoc in many of our neighborhoods. But I also think this speaks to the broader issue we have in our city right now of a lack of real recreational opportunities for young people. When I was growing up, I had stuff to do at the Boys and Girls Club. I was going to vacation Bible school. I was busy from sun up to sundown. And we have disinvested in those types of programs in our community for decades. And we got to get back to the basics and invest in those types of recreational opportunities for young people to be engaged and live a productive life.
And I know we could go a long way in talking about some of those investments, but we'll definitely be following up on that. kind of in a broader term now, economy and recovery, what's the first thing you're going to do as mayor to help the city recover from the pandemic, which may or may not be ended by the time you are in there?
Well, we have a moonshot moment and opportunity right now with the relief fund we're getting from President Biden, over $511 million. You know, if I'm mayor, I want to leverage that investment to a couple billion to make sure that we can have the capital we need to better invest in our neighborhoods and put people in our neighborhoods first. I think it starts with supporting main street businesses. You know, we know that small and medium-sized businesses are the bedrock of our local economy and are responsible for a large share of our job growth. I think secondly, you know, what we've seen in this pandemic is we have a short supply of affordable and workforce housing. And so the next mayor must work with Secretary Fudge, our state legislature and the governor to ensure that we have all the resources we need at the local level to drive more investments in affordable and workforce housing. And then lastly, education. You know, many of our children did not log online last year during this pandemic. We've lost nearly 8,000 of our kids due to the lack of transparency and engagement with our parents during COVID-19. And so we have to do everything in our power to address the learning loss that our kids experienced last year, but also ensure that our children have the workforce readiness skills they need to compete once they graduate from a Cleveland Public High School.
Okay, you drove head on nicely into our next couple of questions there, but let me just back up on that, the American Rescue Act money that you're referencing. I'm not sure how much of it you'll be able to control by the time you get there, but there should be a second portion of that. And you mentioned a number of things, but how would you use what money you do control? Specifically, what's the one thing that you would do with that money?
Well, in addition to a clear focus on neighborhood investments, I would say, you know, really tackling some of these structural issues that have plagued Cleveland for far too long. Obviously, the digital divide is a major issue. And, you know, this council leadership and mayor missed an opportunity nearly 5 years ago by not taking action and swift action to eradicate the digital divide. And we saw the consequences of that action last year during this pandemic. So excited to see the investments that Digital C is getting with their access to high-speed broadband efforts across the community. I want to support that effort to make sure that there is no neighborhood in the city that doesn't have access to high-speed broadband. And then secondly, the lead paint crisis. You know, it's great to see the work of the Lead Safe Coalition and the activist work of Clash. And I think the next mayor must use a large share of that money to eradicate the lead paint crisis in the city to ensure that no child is ever poisoned by lead paint again.
All right, and again, that takes us right into the next topic of education, and you've just referenced a real issue, and that is, you know, the education losses suffered by Cleveland children as a result of the pandemic. Some of that we know related to the lack of access online. So what's the first thing you do as a mayor to stem those losses in education?
We have to be really honest about this conversation, Mark. You know, many of our children were suffering due to the achievement gap before COVID-19, and that was only exacerbated during this pandemic. Excited to see many of our children involved in the Summer Learning Loss program right now due to Eric Gordon's leadership. I think that's a good step in the right direction. One thing I want to explore is maybe year-round school and year-round high-dosage mentoring for many of our children next academic school year to ensure they can get caught up. And the other thing I would say is this, is that what we learned during this pandemic is that the nature of work has changed, and the future of work is going to continue to change and be accelerated. And so we must make sure that we are repositioning our Cleveland Public School District to get ahead of this curve. And one thing I want to do to address that is I want to encourage and support every junior and senior inside a CMSD high school to have a year-round apprenticeship or an internship program where they're making at least $15 an hour so that we can have a straight-to-work pathway for every child inside of Cleveland Public Schools.
You mentioned digital divide a minute ago, and you would use some of that rescue money. But honestly, as you also noted, people have been talking about the digital divide forever. I've done stories on it. Others have dived in. Why hasn't it happened? What is the one thing holding us back on digital divide?
It's one of the major issues of why I'm in this campaign, Mark. We have a culture of complacency in this city. It's a cancer on our community right now, and it's that lack of urgency that has gotten us to this point. And instead of being so reactive on these issues, we need a mayor who can really galvanize every sector in this community to be more proactive and have a greater sense of urgency to tackle these issues like the digital divide.
All right, now I know you and I have talked about progressive field, but for parity, I want to read you the question and have you weigh in again with me. It'll work nicely against the other answers we've gotten today. Do you support public funding for progressive field renovation and other stadiums coming down the line? Why or why not?
Well, it is a great economic and civic asset that we have 3 major sports teams in the city of Cleveland to support our regional economy. But I believe that, as mayor, I want to ensure that every deal that we fund, whether it's Progressive Field or the Browns or any other large-scale development project, that is structured with an equity lens, that there is strong public engagement and public input, and that there are strong community benefits aligned to those respective projects. And in this case, we don't have any real details on, is there a community benefits agreement? The public has not been involved in these discussions yet. Even City Council found out at the last minute. And that just screams to me as a lack of transparency. And that's why there's so much distrust right now in this community on this issue among a host of others.
Jumping a little bit, but under this umbrella of bigger city issues that we're all dealing with. Yesterday, obviously, we saw news on the census that was probably not a surprise. Cleveland lost 6% of population over the last 10 years. I guess in that same tone, what's the most important action that you could take as mayor to stem the loss of residents?
What we're seeing in this moment as we're trying to claw out of this pandemic, Mark, is that mid-sized cities like Cleveland, I believe, are uniquely positioned to lead America's recovery. The fact that Cincinnati was able to turn itself around, Buffalo, another prime example, Columbus is now the largest city in the state. And really, over the last 16 years, we've lost nearly 37% of our population. And for me, it's all about having a city government that's focused on getting back to the basics, right? Having a modern and responsive city hall to support our residents and to support small businesses, having a competitive workforce and a thriving public school system. And lastly, but certainly not least, making sure that regardless if you're in Mount Pleasant or in West Park, you feel safe and secure to raise a family and live your best life. And the cities that get those 3 things right are the cities that are going to win in this next moment.
Justin, if there is one issue that you think drives people, just one, what is the issue that's driving them out of this city?
A lack of a responsive, engaged city hall.
Okay. Here's a larger topic, but one that probably is relevant as well. Does Cleveland have a systematic race problem that divides the city and us, and how would you address it?
Absolutely. It's great to see that we have declared racism as a public health crisis, but race has been a dividing line in the city for a long time. We remain still one of the most segregated cities in America. And as mayor, I think there are a couple of things I can do. Number one, symbolically in terms of how I lead, right? And I think in this moment, we have a special opportunity to build really a new political coalition to really tackle some of these problems, because, what happens to a poor black child in Mount Pleasant should really affect a family in West Park, right? And all of our destinies are interconnected in this moment right now, and we can't negate that issue. But I think if we can ensure that every neighborhood in this city has access to real economic opportunity, that will go a long way to really addressing some of these racial issues that have plagued our city for far too long, in my opinion.
I know there's a lot more we could dive in on that, but we're going to move to what we've been calling the lightning round today. Okay. Shorter answers than not would be better, but I'm always open to listening. We can get the Ginsu knife out and edit anything. But we're going to start with one that I'm curious. What's your favorite city park?
Ooh, it's got to be Zelma George Park. That's where I learned how to play ball like a man back in the day. So when my hoop dreams were really high and mighty.
Who's been the best mayor in your lifetime?
Man, that's a great one. Mike White.
I wouldn't expect anything different on that one. Cleveland Indians, the Cavs, or the Browns?
Browns.
Why?
I'm just a football guy. I just fond memories of my late father taking me to Chuck's Diner after getting off at the fire station in Cleveland Heights and then going down to Muni Lot to watch a Browns game. Just always been a big Browns fan.
I know this one's complicated, but I'm unfairly boiling it down. Burke Lakefront Airport, keep it open or close it?
Close it.
And we know that's tough to do. How's that going to happen?
Well, everyone talks about the biggest barriers around Burke, high construction costs. We got the Army Corps of Engineers dredging site there. How do we make sure we have a good deal with the FAA? I think those are all three issues we can work around with the right political leadership.
Yeah, but Jones Day and their lawyers and the corporate overlords here might not like all this. They really rely, and they have seen an increase on that airport.
I'm sure they can figure that out.
What's your favorite Cleveland restaurant?
Mount Pleasant Barbecue, right on Kinsman.
Do you have one on the west side?
On the west side, I like big fan of Parallax. Yeah.
Okay. Who is your second choice for mayor?
That's
this
a
year?
good one. I would say State Senator Sandra Williams. Probably a bias because we both go to the same church. So,
Which is which one?
Olivet Institutional Baptist Church. Yeah.
Cleveland's corporate community, friend or foe to City Hall?
Friend and key partner.
And how can they be used to help move the city forward?
I think being as aggressive as we can to attract new investment to the city and attract new talent to grow our population over the next decade.
What's your workout routine or your pastime that keeps you exercising?
I'm a spin guy, so pre-COVID I would go to harness cycle a lot, front row. I love to cycle. Right now it's all about the Peloton bike and working out when I can get a few minutes from the campaign trail.
Yeah, well, you're doing a lot of walking on your campaign
Yes.
trail, right? So do you have any sense of how many steps you're getting in doing that?
It's a lot. I have no idea. I'm going to need a lot of new pairs of shoes after this campaign's over, by the way.
We're asking each candidate one individual question. I think everybody here would agree they all get the same level of difficulty, so no big surprises here. But what is that vulnerability that your opponents say you have, and they argue that you are the least experienced candidate in this race. You've never been elected, you've never been inside a legislative body, you've never worked as an public executive office holder. Shouldn't that matter to voters? So why do you think it doesn't?
Well, I would say the current political experience has gotten us to be one of the worst cities in America on many different outcomes. We've lost nearly 37% of our population since 2005, poorest big city in America, least connected in terms of digital divide. And I think in this moment, voters want bold, innovative, dynamic change. Someone that's not been a part of the status quo and the current political system. And I'm someone that has had a lot of great experience outside of politics, right? I've advised big city mayors across the country as an executive at Gallup, fought for effective public transit as a board member at RTA, also worked to help support small and medium-sized businesses as an executive at Key Bank. So I'm bringing not only my executive experience outside of government and politics, but my lived experience as a kid who grew up on a rough street on 121st and Dove, and is that kind of lived and executive experience I think the voters want in this election.
And I'm just throwing one bonus question in here. It's one I wish I would have asked everyone else, but if you're mayor, paint me the picture of what Cleveland looks like 4 years from now.
Growing population, regardless if you're on east side or the west side, you have access to a quality park, access to affordable public transit, and access to a good paying job. But I think lastly, a different character and a different swag to our own narrative as a city. We got to get out of this defeatist mindset. And I think we need a mayor who's going to give our residents a sense of pride, a sense of hope, and a sense of optimism. And I believe I'm the right leader for the right time in order to deliver on that promise.